All right, so we have a lot of content to cover today, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending today's DPR virtual information session. My name is Tori Visner, and I'm the Alliance Grants Program Lead for DPR. And today we are going to be talking about all things budgets and budget justifications. I do want to preface this meeting by just noting that DPR currently has 2 open solicitations, so we are currently accepting applications for both our Alliance Grants Program and our Research Grants Program. The information that's going to be covered in this meeting is applicable to both programs. There are a couple places where there are some minor differences for programs, particularly as it relates to the start date of the program. And so in those cases, I will be pointing out the specifics that relate to each program. At any question or at any point, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or drop your questions in the chat box. Additionally, at the end of this presentation, there will be time for questions. All right, so let's go ahead and start with covering the purpose of the budget and the budget justification. So when reviewers are going to rank the proposal applications that are received, the scope of work and the budget together are weighted at 20%. And the solicitations for each program detail specific criteria that reviewers will use when ranking proposal applications. But with regard to the budgets, reviewers are going to be considering things like whether the budget is reasonable to complete the project, whether the budget justification appropriately justifies project expenses, and whether or not the budget is complete and accurate. So really they're provided to give reviewers the ability to fully understand the depth of value that's provided by each project and to demonstrate that the project's costs are going to be appropriate and that the described work has been well planned. And so before we really delve into the details of the budget, I just want to cover a few definitions for 3 different types of costs. So understanding these types of costs is really essential to be able to accurately determine your budget. We're going to be referring back to these terms throughout the presentation, and I will make sure to remind everyone of these different terms. So they're a little confusing now. We'll be discussing them again in greater detail as we continue. But the first cost I want to cover is your direct costs. So these are costs that can be identified specifically with a particular grant project and that can be directly assigned to grant activities. So something like lab consumable costs, for example, like media that's purchased for the purpose of culturing bacteria, something like that, postdoc or researcher salaries, and then travel costs. The second type of cost is going to be your modified total direct cost, or MTDC. Basically, these are all the costs to which indirect costs can be applied. So this includes all salaries and wages for any personnel, fringe benefits, materials, supplies, services, travel, consultants, and subawards up to the first $25,000 of each subaward. So modified total direct cost is going to exclude things like tuition and fees, things like equipment. And then finally, there is your indirect costs. So again, indirect costs can be charged on the modified total direct costs. So it's the percentage of the MTDC that covers costs of conducting business that can't be identified readily and specifically with specific grant projects or with specific grant activities. So your indirect costs are covering things like building maintenance, port services, library operations, administrative services, things like that. And so the budget and budget justification template is contained within the proposal application form for each program. So we have a proposal application form for our Alliance Grants Program, and that's what you see in this image on the right. And then we have a separate one for our Research Grants Program. We do require that all applications submit their budgets via this format, so the format that's contained within the proposal application form. We understand that applicants or their budget offices may have internal software that can be used to develop budget calculations, and that is absolutely allowable. You can definitely use that internal software, but the values do at the end of the day need to be transferred over to this provided application form. So we are unable to accept any kind of internal forms, things like Excel spreadsheets, anything like that. And then one thing I do want to note is that DPR staff does manually verify all of these budget values when performing application screening. So after proposal applications are submitted, DPR staff does go through the budget and confirm that all the calculations work out correctly. And so the first table that is included in the proposal application form within the budget section is going to be the task budget table. So this is what the template looks like, this image on the right. And the task budget table is really intended to be an estimate of what fraction of the total direct costs will be allocated to each individual task. So this really helps reviewers understand the value that's associated with each task. So as you're going through and creating your proposal application, you're going to be filling out the scope of work that's going to detail the different objectives and tasks that are involved in your project. And then at the end of that, when you start working through your budget, you're going to want to basically provide the direct cost that's associated with each of those tasks. So here there are some instructions included on how best to fill this out. So each task that's in the scope of work is going to be entered into the task column, so that second column in the image. And then you're going to want to consider the amount of personnel, time, the travel costs, materials and supplies costs, subcontractor costs, so really any direct costs that are devoted to the task. And you're going to want to enter that into the cost column, so that third column. The total costs of the individual tasks should add up to the project total direct cost of the grant. So that's that value that's going to be at the very bottom where it says provide direct cost total. And then we're going to talk a lot more about the main budget table, but it's really critical that this total direct cost is going to match what's in the main budget table under the total direct costs as well. So here we have an example of a budget table, and I do want to note that this is an example, and I'm going to be presenting a lot more examples. These examples that are included were developed by DPR staff. They are entirely fictional examples. They're really just intended to provide applicants with a comprehensive example of how to complete these tables. They're not intended in any way to describe DPR's preferred grant topics. They're not intended to describe DPR's preferred budget size. They're not at all intended to limit applicant creativity. Again, they are really just for your use in developing your application to be able to use as an example. And all of these tables and these examples of our budget examples are going to be found on our website. I believe they're contained within our guidance documents, which should be going live on our website later today. So you'll be able to download them and use them as you prepare your proposal application. So here on the left, we have, again, an example of the task budget. On the right is the main budget table. And again, we're going to go through in much more depth this main budget table, but I just want to flag these two highlighted sections. So your project total direct costs that are contained in the budget table, so that's that highlighted number on the left, $194,031, should match the total direct costs in the main budget table. So again, under total direct costs in the main budget table on the right, we see that the values do match. All right, so now we are going to talk a little more about the main budget table. So the main budget table is intended to be an overview of the costs that are allocated to each budget category for each year of the project. So there are various budget categories included, including personnel, travel, materials and supplies, equipment, rent, subcontractors, subrecipients, and then other direct costs. So the amount of each of these different categories should be entered on a yearly basis. And then we do ask that you enter costs to the nearest whole dollar. Again, we do manually go through and verify all these values. So we do check that all of the numbers add up correctly. And then for all the values that are entered into this main budget table, they will need to be fully justified in the budget justification. And we're going to talk much more about the budget justification as well. And so the main budget table, at the very top, there will be a space for you to fill out the principal investigator's name and the principal investigator's organization. Then along the top, you'll see there is a budget category heading, and then there are headings for each of the 3 years of the project, and then finally a total category. I do want to point out that for year three is only 6 months in length. So it goes from July 1st of 2025 through the end of December 2025. So again, 6 months in length. I do want to also flag year one. So this is really the biggest place where there are differences between our research grants and our alliance grants as they pertain to budgets. So our research grants programs begin on July 1st, 2023, whereas our alliance grants projects are scheduled to begin September 1st, 2023. So for the alliance grants projects, year one is only going to be 10 months in length as compared to the research grants projects, which will be 12 months in length. We do ask that you do not change the project dates within these tables just because they are templates, but we do request that if you are looking to apply for an alliance grant, that you plan costs appropriately based on the start date of September 1st, 2023. All right, so this first budget category is going to be the personnel. So this includes salary and fringe benefits. Something important to notice: to receive grant funds as personnel, any staff must be paid through the same organization as the principal investigator. So again, along the top, there's space for you to fill out the principal investigator's name and the organization. So any staff that are having costs associated within this budget category must be part of that principal investigator's organization. If they're not part of the principal investigator's organization, they will need to be listed as a subcontractor, which is a separate budget category, and we are going to get to that very shortly. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to combine the salary and fringe benefits for all of the individuals being paid through the principal investigator's organization on this personnel line. Again, you're going to want to ensure that you're using the correct start date based on the program that you're applying for. So if you're applying for a research grant, that's going to be July 1st, 2023. Alliance is going to begin September 1st, 2023. And then for both programs, again, year three is only going to be 6 months in length. So you're going to want to make sure that you are calculating out those salary and fringe benefits based on that shortened time frame. All right, moving on to our second category, it's our travel category. Something important to note is only travel within the state of California is allowable using grant funds. So any travel out of state, out of country is not allowed. Any travel that's funded by this grant must be included in the budget table. So any travel that's not initially included, should your project become funded, would require a grant amendment to be allowable to be charged as part of it. So you're going to want to make sure that you factor in any travel. And then you're going to want to combine all the travel costs, again, for individuals that are being paid through the principal investigators organization on this travel line. Travel and reimbursement for travel costs should be in accordance with the appropriate policies. So here are hyperlinks to various websites, depending on what type of applicant you are. So if you are a non-University of California or non-California State University applicant, you must adhere to CalHR's travel policy. And again, there's a hyperlink included where you can find those details. And then if you are either a University of California applicant or a California State University applicant, also we've included in the second and third bullet points the relevant hyperlinks that you should be adhering to. If you are either a federal or tribal agency applicant who is applying, we do request that you reach out if you have any specific travel policies or any questions prior to submitting a proposal application. Our third budget category is going to be the materials and supplies category. So we request that you combine all of the materials and supplies, so things like laboratory consumables, tools, compost, software subscriptions, anything like that on the materials and supplies line. Similar to travel, the addition of a material, if it's not initially included in the approved budget, may require a grant amendment. This is particularly true of things like computers. The computers are a necessary component. You're going to want to ensure that you include those in the materials and supplies. Otherwise, should your project get funded, it may trigger a grant amendment to be able to add to the materials and supplies. All right, our fourth budget category is going to be equipment. A full definition of what equipment is can be found in our terms and conditions on our website, but as a brief overview, we define equipment as having a useful life of at least 1 year, having an acquisition unit cost of at least $5,000, and having been purchased with grant funds. We also define it as any products, objects, machinery, apparatus, implements, or tools purchased, used, or constructed within the grant, including those products, objects, machinery, apparatus, implements, or tools from which over 30% of the equipment is composed of materials purchased for the grant. Again, you're going to want to combine all equipment costs on this equipment line item. Our fifth category is rent. So you're going to want to combine all rental costs, so things like facility rentals, item rentals on this rent line item. All right, we have a budget category for subcontractors. So a subcontractor is an independent entity that's going to be collaborating with or providing a service to the applicant to complete objectives of the grant. So recall that if staff cannot receive funds through the principal investigators organization, they need to be listed as subcontractors. We request that if you have a subcontractor, you combine all of their given costs into the subcontractor line. And if you have any subcontractors, they're going to need to complete a budget table. So again, one of these main budget tables along with a complete budget justification. If your project requires multiple subcontractors, each of them must have their own subcontractor line. So you'll just want to duplicate this line, but subcontractor number 2. Ideally include actually the name of the subcontractor. All right, then we have the subrecipient budget category. So subrecipients are a specific classification of subcontractor. These only apply if you are a University of California or California State University applicant. We request that you refer to your specific UC or CSU institution for guidance as to whether or not a subcontractor meets the criteria to be classified as a subrecipient. Similar to subcontractors, if you have a subrecipient as part of your budget, you're going to need to include a separate budget table and budget justification for that subrecipient. All right, our last category is going to be other direct costs. So this is a way that you can provide a cost breakdown for any other expenses that your project may have. So things like insurance, graduate student tuition and fees, IT costs, anything like that should be included on its own other direct costs line item. You're going to then want to denote whether or not a given other direct cost is subject to indirect costs. So again, this goes back to the MTDC definition that we introduced earlier. So things like graduate student tuition and fees are not allowed to have indirect costs associated with them. So in this highlighted image on the right, you see there's this column that says subject to IDC Calc. Currently in the template, they all say Y or yes. If you have a specific other direct cost that cannot have indirect costs charged to it, you're going to want to change that Y to an N to indicate that indirect costs are not going to be charged on that. If you have more than 5 other direct costs, you can add additional lines as necessary. All right, so then here highlighted, we see the total direct costs line. So you're going to want to add up the costs of all the budget categories and enter the values on this line for each of the years and then the total. And then do recall that the value inputted in the last column, so indicating the total direct costs over the full project period, does need to match the total direct costs that's included in the task budget. So again, just to refer back to what the task budget looks like and where those two values that should match up are. All right, the next thing you're going to want to do in your budget is you're going to calculate out the modified total direct costs. So the modified total direct costs are calculated on a yearly basis by totaling all of the direct costs that are allowed to have associated indirect costs charged to them. So this includes all salaries and wages, all fringe benefits, all materials and supplies, travel, and then subcontracts up to the first $25,000 of each subcontract. So things that are not allowed to be included in the modified total direct cost and associatedly not have indirects charged on them are going to be things like equipment, capital expenditures, patient care costs, tuition remission, rental costs of off-site facilities, scholarships and fellowships, the portion of any subcontract in excess of that first $25,000, and then any subrecipient costs cannot be included in this modified total direct cost calculation. So once you've determined what can be included in the modified total direct cost, you're going to want to enter it in this line on a yearly basis and then total it up and enter it in that last column. You're then going to want to enter the indirect costs rate. So occasionally different organizations will use facilities and administrative, F&A, instead of indirect. They're the same thing. So you're going to want to enter that cost rate as a percentage used by your organization in that highlighted section of the budget table. And then we do want to note that DPR allows a maximum rate of 25% to be charged. You're then going to want to calculate the indirect costs both on a yearly basis and a total basis by multiplying the MTDC by the indirect cost rate. And again, just as a reminder, DPR allows a maximum rate of 25%. Then in these final two line items, you're going to want to enter the total cost per year and the total cost for the proposed project period. And you're going to do this by summing together the total direct costs and then the indirect costs for every given year. For this one, ensure that you are using the total direct costs rather than the modified total direct costs. And then again, you're going to want to sum together the total direct costs over the 3 years and enter it into that final column. So here we have an example of what a main budget table may look like. And again, I just do want to remind everyone that these are completely fictional examples. They were created by DPR staff to just provide our applicants with examples of what comprehensive budgets look like. They're, again, not intended to describe our preferred grant topics, budget sizes. They're not intended to limit your creativity at all. Again, they're just examples, and they are going to be uploaded on our website later today, so you will be able to go and reference them again. And so in this example, you're going to want to ensure that the total costs per year and the total costs for the proposed project period, so those final two lines, do indeed add up correctly. You're going to want to make sure that costs are entered to the nearest whole dollar. So again, if it's more than 50 cents, you're going to want to round up, otherwise round down. And then you're going to want to ensure that the costs that are included in this main budget table are going to match the budget justifications. That is what we are going to move on to next after I show the second example. So this is another example of what a completed main budget table may look like. The previous one is an example for our Alliance Grants program. This example is for our Research Grants program. These examples, again, are going to be uploaded on the proposal applications material webpage for each grants program. We've provided two examples. They are specific for each of our two program types, but again, there's a good amount of overlap between the two programs when it comes to filling out the budget. So if you are applying for an Alliance grant or you're applying for a research grant, you are able to reference both of them to use as examples. All right, so moving on to the budget justification. So this is an example here on the right of what our template budget justification section of our proposal application form looks like. The purpose of the budget justification is to fully justify the amounts that are in the main budget table. And this is really to be able to show transparency in the proposed use of public funds. So because these grants are using public funds, we do need to be transparent and upfront about where these costs are going. So the applicable cost should be entered into the tables in the appropriate categories. So within the budget justification, there's going to be a category for each of those line items that are in the main budget table. So you can see here on this example, there's the personnel in capital blue letters. So there will be a different category for each of the categories that are in the main budget. Again, DPR staff does go through and confirm that all costs add up correctly. So we do ask that you go through and verify as you are filling out your budget and budget justification to just make sure that all the costs are adding up correctly. If a category is not relevant to your project, you can feel free to delete the various tables. So for example, if your project doesn't have any equipment, you can feel free to delete the relevant equipment table and just enter NA. And again, just as a reminder, all values that are included in the main budget table do need to be fully justified in this budget justification. So the first category we're going to talk about is going to be personnel. So you're going to want to go through and fill out the staff name for each of the personnel that are going to be working on the project, and then describe their role on the project. So this also includes TBD positions, so any to be determined positions. We do request that you also include them here. This is common if, for example, you will be hiring a postdoc or a graduate student or an undergraduate student to work on the project after you receive funding. So it's very common to see things like that. Staff members like that to be listed as TBD at this stage. So here we have an example of an Alliance grant personnel example. So we have the 7 different personnel names that are listed under that name subcategory. And then we see listed out their role on the project. So we request that you put the name, their position. So for example, principal investigator, program manager, undergraduate student, whatever their position is, then whatever their function on the project is going to be. So for example, the principal investigator is overseeing project completion and serving as a supervisor of personnel. And then finally, we request that you add the % level of effort for all projects, so including, or for all positions, including the TBD positions. So for example, you see that the principal investigator is expected to put 3% effort per year, while as the program manager is 25%. This is another example from our research grants example. So again, very similar. Here you can see an example of what it might look like if you have a TBD position. It's one of those to be determined positions. In this case, the TBD position relates to 2 undergrad students that would be hired up after the project were to get off the ground. So within all of these different categories, we've included tables to assist you in preparing your calculations. And so this is probably the biggest place where the start date is going to have a large impact. So again, I want to remind you that if you are applying for an Alliance grant project, that you should budget 10 months in year 1. So again, that start date of September 1st, 2023. And then both the Alliance and research grants projects should budget for 6 months in year 3. So again, year 3 goes from July 1st of 2025 through the end of December 2025. So again, 6 months there. And then here we have 2 examples of what these filled out tables may look like. On the top, we have a research example. On the bottom, we have an Alliance grants example. Again, just to reiterate, you're going to want to ensure that all salaries and fringe benefits are calculated in year 1 using that correct start date. So again, research grants 12 months, Alliance grants is 10 months, and then again, year 3, 6 months in length. So what you're going to want to do is fill out the base salary for each individual. So for each individual that will be working on the project, there will be a separate one of these tables. You'll fill out the base salary for the individual, and then in parentheses after that, you're going to want to include the number of months where this is calculated for. In year 1, please put NA in annual increase and merit increase, because that's not going to be applicable in the first year. And then that final line item is going to be for the percent effort. So for example, in this research example on top, the base salary is included, and then they are charging based on 12 months. So that full year one at 20% effort. And then in that final line item, we see the total salary requested. So that's based on multiplying base salary by the percent effort and then accounting for it taking place over the 12 months. In the Alliance grants example on the bottom, again, because that start date is going to be September 1st of 2023 and not July 1st of 2023, we see that the calculation is based on 10 months in that first year. And then for both the research and Alliance example, in that year 3, we see in parentheses 6 months. So these calculations have taken into account the fact that that final year of work is only 6 months. The next portion of the personnel section is going to be fringe benefits. And so again, I know I'm sounding a little bit like a broken record here, but we do want to ensure that if you are applying for an Alliance grants project, you are budgeting for 10 months in that year 1 as opposed to 12 months. And then again, both projects, both Alliance and research projects should again budget for 6 months in that year 3. And so this is an example of what that fringe benefits table looks like. Again, you're going to want one of these tables for each of the staff members. And what you're going to do is you're going to enter the applicable fringe benefit rate. So this would come from your organization. You're going to enter the fringe rate in the line that reads fringe rate. And then you're going to calculate it out by multiplying this fringe rate by the total salary requested in each given year in the previous tables. And so then in this final line item, we see the total fringe benefits requested. And again, these are just 2 examples that are pulled from our example budgets. Then finally, there is a table where you will be able to add up total personnel costs across the 3 years and in total for all of the salaries and all of the benefits. And here we see 2 examples of what that would look like. So again, you're going to add up, if you have, say, 5 staff members, you're going to end up having 5 of those salary tables. You're going to have 5 of those fringe benefit tables. And then here in this final table, you're going to want to add up the salaries from all 5 of those tables and enter them here. Same thing for the fringe benefits. And then again, we've just provided an example of the research grants example and the Alliance grants example. Again, it's very essential that the numbers that are calculated in all of these do match. So here we have the total personnel costs. This highlighted section is from our budget justification. So that's the image that you see up on top. This bottom image is pulled from the main budget table. So you're going to want to ensure that the values align. So we can see in year 1, 68,000. That does match what's in the main budget table, so that composite budget on the bottom. So again, we do go through and manually verify everything. So we request that you do ensure that everything is adding up correctly and everything matches on your end when you submit your proposal application form. The next part of the budget justification is going to be the travel section. So again, you're going to want to reference your specific organization's travel policy if you are a UC or CSU applicant. If you are not, you're going to want to refer to CalHR's travel policy. And again, those hyperlinks can be found on the slide that I presented earlier. And so what you're going to want to do is for each trip that will be taken, you're going to want to denote whether or not the travel is taking place in year 1, year 2, or year 3 of the project. You're going to want to include the destination, the duration, staff names, the staff that will be taking part in the trip, and then the purpose of the travel. Then you're going to want to copy these tables again for every trip that you're going to have. So every trip is going to have one of these associated tables. And it breaks it down by travel, per diem, and lodging. So travel, there's a little checkbox where you can indicate if a flight is involved in the travel or if a rental vehicle or personal or company vehicle is going to be used. There's space to fill out relevant information to help you in making these calculations. So for example, if a flight is involved, you're going to want to fill out the total number of passengers, the airfare per passenger, and then the total flight cost. Similarly, if there's a rental vehicle involved, there's space to fill out the total rental costs, the fuel costs, and then if there's a personal or company vehicle used, the distance that will be traveled, and then the mileage reimbursement rate. For per diem, you're going to want to fill out the number of days, the number of staff, and the cost per staff per day. And then for lodging, the number of days, the number of staff, and the cost per staff per day. Then finally, you're going to want to fill out the total cost per trip, the number of trip occurrences. If, for example, it's something like sampling trips where there's multiple trips, it takes place on maybe a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, you'll want to indicate that there. And then finally, the grand total. So here we have an example of what a filled out travel table may look like. So in this example, the trip is going to take place in year 3. The destination is the Central Valley. It's going to be a 5-day trip where one staff member named Pete is going to be attending. And the purpose is to do March and June sampling. So this is one of those indications where the same trip is taking place multiple times. So you see down at the bottom, under number of trip occurrences, they've written 2 to indicate that this trip, again, is taking place twice. Here we see that they're going to be using a personal or company vehicle, traveling 330 miles at a mileage reimbursement rate of 0.585. So when multiplied out, you get that $193 total that you see in the right column. Similarly, they've calculated out the per diem costs for 5 days of travel, one staff member at $62. And then similarly, they've also done the calculations for lodging to come up with the total cost per trip of $895. Again, because this trip is taking place twice, they've multiplied that by 2 to get the grand total of this trip. And then again, you're going to want to copy those tables for as many trips as are applicable for your project. And then at the end, there is a final table that will allow you to sum up all of the travel costs on both a yearly basis and a total basis. And again, you're going to want to make sure that the values that are in the budget justification for the travel section match with the main budget table travel category. All right, our third category in the budget justification is going to be materials and supplies. So for all of your materials and supplies, you are going to want to list out the item type, the price per unit, the quantity needed, and then the cost on a yearly basis. So for example, here we see that this project is requesting iPad tablets at $600 a piece. They are requesting a total of 4 of them. And these are all going to be purchased in year 1 of the project, coming out to a total of $2,400. And you see that they've repeated this process for all the other requested items, including field guides, weed wrenches, gloves, food and beverages, all of the applicable costs that can be charged in this materials and supplies category should be listed out here. And then at the very bottom of this table, there will be a space to include a complete justification of the project's need for the items that are requested. So for example, they've listed out why they're requesting the purchase of tablets in year 1, the purpose of hand tools, the purpose of beverages and snacks. So anything that's included in that table should be justified at the bottom. And then again, there will be a separate table at the end of that section where you can calculate out the yearly costs of materials and supplies, again, on a yearly basis and then a total basis. Again, you're going to want to make sure that these values are matching what's in the main budget for the entire project. The next category we have is equipment. So again, I provided a definition of equipment in an earlier slide, and the full definition can be included in our terms and conditions, but really it's going to be anything that has a useful life of more than a year and costs more than $5,000. So anything that can be considered equipment should be included here. You should include the item name, so the type of equipment, a full justification of why the equipment is needed, and then list out the equipment purchases per year. If additional line items are needed, you can always feel free to add them. So here we have an example of what one of these filled out tables might look like. This project is requesting an automated DNA purifier for high throughput DNA extraction of field and greenhouse samples prior to PCR. And they are charging that entirely in year one. So they are requesting $68,500 in year one of the project to purchase that piece of equipment. Again, you're going to have a table at the end of this section where you can tally up the yearly equipment cost total. So again, on a yearly basis and then on a total basis. Again, you're going to want to make sure that this matches what's in the main budget table. Our next category we have is rent. So again, any facility rentals, any item rentals, anything like that should be included in this table. Again, you're going to want to include the name, the justification. If there's any annual increase that applies, for example, sometimes greenhouse rentals or field rental sites, things like that have a known increase that's going to take place annually. So you're going to want to include that in the table. And then there's space to list out the costs on a yearly basis. So an example of what this may look like, this project is requesting greenhouse rental fees. So requesting 2 separate greenhouse rentals to conduct grapevine assays for their project. There's not an applicable annual increase in this case, and the total comes out to $2,500 for each rental. And again, they are charging them in this example all in year one. Similar to all the other categories, there's going to be a table at the end where you can fill out the total rental costs on a yearly basis. And then again, on a total basis, you're going to want to make sure, again, that it matches what's in the main budget. And again, just want to reiterate that we do manually check these. So please ensure that all of your values are matching and add up correctly. All right, moving on to subcontractors and subawardees, or they may also be called subrecipients. So just as a reminder, subcontractors are independent entities that are going to be collaborating with or providing a service to an applicant to complete objectives of a grant. Whereas subawardees or subrecipients are going to be a specific classification of subcontractors. These subawardees and subrecipients only apply to University of California or California State University applicants. And again, we request that if you think this may apply to your project, that you reach out to your grants office and inquire as to whether or not they should be listed as a subawardee or subrecipient, or whether they should be listed as a subcontractor. Again, as a reminder, all subcontractors and subrecipients are going to need a completed budget table and budget justification. So you're going to need to copy those budget tables and budget justifications and fill it out in its entirety for each subcontractor or subrecipient. So here we have an example of what the subcontractor costs look like in the main budget justification. So again, there's going to be a table where you can fill out the name of the subcontractor, the costs on a yearly basis, and then the total. Again, to reiterate, you're going to want to make sure that that matches what's in the main budget table. And here we see an example from one of our research grants example. Again, just ensure that what's in the budget justification is matching what's in the main budget table. And then again, as I mentioned, all subcontractors and subrecipients are going to need a completed budget table and a budget justification. So in the proposal application form, at the very end, there is a subcontractor and subawardee budget and budget justification. If your project doesn't have any subcontractors or subrecipients, you can feel free to just delete that portion. There's only one of these included at the end. So if you have multiple subcontractors or subawardees, you're going to want to duplicate it and again, fill it out for each applicable subcontractor or subrecipient. All right, then we have our other direct costs. Similar to some of the other tables we've shown, you're going to want to fill out the ODC type, the category, provide a justification of why it's necessary, and then the costs on a yearly basis. So an example here, we see that a project is requesting tuition and fees to contribute to a grant student, a graduate student's compensation package. So we see here that the costs are listed out on an annual basis for year 1, year 2, and year 3. Again, if you have multiple ODCs, you're going to want to just add an applicable line item for each of those. Then there will be another table where you'll be able to sum up all of those totals and include it. And again, you're going to want to make sure that it matches what's listed in the main budget table. Again, if your project does not have a category that is applicable, so for example, say your project doesn't require any travel or it doesn't require equipment, you can feel free to delete all of the tables and just enter NA. It'll clean up what your budget form looks like and probably make it easier to review in the long run. All right, finally, I want to touch on indirect costs. So again, indirect costs are based on a percentage that is set by your organization. We at DPR are limiting indirect costs to 25%, so a maximum of 25% can be charged. And again, this is charged on the modified total direct costs. It's pretty simple in the budget justification. You'll just see a place where you can enter in the total indirect costs. You're going to want to make sure it's matching what's in the main budget table in that applicable section. And then I want to touch really briefly on subcontractors and subrecipients with a simplified example. I mentioned in brief that in the modified total direct costs, there is a $25,000 maximum allowed for each subcontract that can be factored into that modified total direct cost. And so in this example here, we see that a subcontractor has total direct costs that are totaling $34,500, and the breakdown of this on an annual basis is going to be $15,000 in year 1, $12,000 in year 2, and $7,500 in year 3. So again, because there's a $25,000 maximum on that, you're going to want to keep that in mind. And so in year 1, since they're charging $15,000, they are allowed to include that total, so $15,000 into the main budget modified total direct cost. In year 2, they are requesting $12,000. In this case, they're limited at including $10,000 of that $12,000 in the modified total direct costs, because again, that brings you to that $25,000 cap. And so in year 2, there's $2,000 that cannot be factored into that main budget modified total direct cost. And then in year 3, since they've already hit that $25,000 maximum, none of those costs would be allowed to be included in the main budget MTDC. So I know I covered a ton of information there, and I am going to open it up for any questions in just a second. But I want to note that any questions that you have as you are developing these budgets and budget justifications can be emailed to us at dprpmgrants.solicitation@cdpr.ca.gov. Additional information on both of our grants programs and to be able to access application materials. And then again, the examples that I have shown throughout this presentation, you're going to want to go to our website at cdpr.ca.gov/DPR grants. And so with that, I would like to thank you for attending, and I will open it up to any questions that anyone may have related to budgets or budget justifications. All right, so if there are no questions, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I know budgets and budget justifications can be sometimes a dense topic. So again, if you ever have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us via email. Again, our email address is dprpmgrants.solicitation@cdpr.ca.gov. We would always be happy to answer any budget justification questions you may have, in addition to any other questions you may have related to our grant applications and our grant application process. I want to thank you all for attending this presentation. I just want to take a quick moment and let you know about some of our other upcoming presentations that we have. We have a number of remaining virtual information sessions. We have 2 more of these budget presentations. They're going to be on September 8th and November 17th from 10 to 11. The information presented is going to be very similar, same slides. You're more than welcome to attend these sessions and ask any questions you may have, but there's not going to be novel content presented during that meeting. Some other topics we're going to be covering include a session on crafting a scope of work, so on writing objectives, tasks, deliverables. These are going to be held on September 1st and October 20th, both from 10 to 11. There's going to be a session on building a strong alliance team on August 25th from 10 to 11. So if you're looking to apply to our Alliance Grants program, highly recommend you attend that session. And then we're going to have 2 general question and answer sessions that are going to be on September 15th and December 1st, again from 10 to 11. So with that, thank you, everyone. I hope you found this information to be useful. And again, feel free to reach out with any questions. Hope you all have a good day. Thank you.